We welcome you to our program entitled Talk Radio. I am one of the hosts, Bishop Dr. Derek A. Reeves, and with me in studio is
Minister Philip King Jr. Always a pleasure to be with you all.
All right, let's dive right into our topic for today. Today the topic is the soul eternal? It's very important for us to realize the eternality of the soul because it has a lot of significant meanings to the believer and the unbeliever. And so let's dive right in. We can go to Genesis chapter 2, verse 7. The Bible says that God, in the beginning, he scooped the dust of the ground. He formed man. That Hebrew word is the word yatsir. He formed man from the dust or the afar of the ground. The afar, fine powder, and one definition literally means rubbish.
Almost like a clay, if you will. And then after that, you see that he breathes into man in his nostrils the breath of life, or the neshama kahi. That's the terminology, Bishop.
Exactly. And so when we look at this terminology, we find that there are two components, and the third component brings it all together and makes it alive. The one component links us to the earth.
Right.
The second component links us to the systemic reality of God.
That's right.
And so we are natural, physical, but we are also spiritual. And the combination of those two things created a living soul,
which we call in the 21st century a mind, or what we would understand to be the mind. It is that bridge that allows us to be able to receive information from both realms of existence, while also being able to enable us to interact within those realms of existence. And there's a lot of different ways that we can go tonight, and I'm sure that you're going to kind of guide us for where we need to go.
It's very important for us to realize that the soul is what I would call the intermediation of the essence of man. And so the soul then learns and receives information from the physical body.
Yes, sir.
But then the soul also receives information from the spiritual essence or reality.
Yes, sir.
And so we don't have a soul, but we are a living soul, according to the scripture. And this living soul then is the combination of the breath of God and the very mind of God, or the Logos. The Bible tells us, in the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God, the same in the beginning was with God, and all things that are in existence were made by him. And there was nothing that was made that was not made by Logos.
Right. Now, I think an important thing to talk about or bring to the forefront of the conversation is that when we talk about the mind, then we're also talking about the person, right? The person, their individuality, who they are, and how they govern who they are in those powers that most can agree that we have when we talk about the mind being the emotion, the volition, and the cognition, the ability to think. So
now, what I want to do though is keep us on track.
No, and I was going to get back to what I was saying.
Because it's important for us to realize the importance of the eternality of the soul. Because one thing that you talked about when we talk about cognitive abilities or the intellect, the emotive abilities, emotion or the volition or the will, there is a reason that the immortality of the soul is very important because when we were created, and I'll say the species of man, Adam, was created in the image of God. Part of that image is the immortality of the mind of God. That immortality then
Right.
indicates, because we are finite,
Right.
immortal,
Right.
or finite, eternal.
Right.
The soul never can go out of existence
Exactly.
because the substantial reality that came from God brought it into existence.
Which was immaterial.
Exactly. So the immaterial reality
Yeah.
came from the breath and the logos of God. And that's very important.
Right. The things that are seen are temporal, but the things that are not seen are eternal. So therefore, like you said, with that, you understand that the mind, being immaterial, now has the ability to never vanquish or lose. I'm
It's
trying to
reality.
be, yeah, it's reality, and that's where I was going with. And so I guess I have a question then, Bishop, because if the mind, if the soul is eternal, where then, because eternal means that it's never ending, it does not end,
Well,
right?
exactly.
So where does the conversation of sin come into play?
Well, it's important,
Right.
because again, we are finite, eternal beings.
Good. Yes, sir.
Which means we were created, but after the soul was created, it continues on perpetually in its existence somewhere. And so the mind, when created, mirrored the thought processes, the wisdom and the knowledge of God. And the reason why it is finite is because it was created.
Right.
The reason why it is eternal, because God desired the human race to consistently
Yes, sir.
learn of Him, to consistently adapt through the reception of knowledge and wisdom. And that knowledge, remember, when you learn, the product of the objective of learning
Right.
is always to bring about change. And so the eternality of the soul, the mind, whatever you want to call it,
Right.
it brings us into a continual shifting and ever changing
Yeah.
into the likeness of our God.
Now, it seems, though, that with that, when we talk about being finite, there is a opportunity there to choose to, like you said, receive the life of God and to choose to walk in accordance to His will and His word. But then on the opposite hand, you have the opportunity to choose to do the opposite of that.
Well, this is where the sin factor
yes.
came in that you were speaking of. Because when God first created Adam, the likeness of God was so strong in him that his soul,
Yeah.
his mind, emotions,
Yeah.
and his will or desire, he always came into the presence of God with expectation. It was outside of his nature to
Right.
not want to come into the
Right.
presence of God.
Right.
And so when Adam fell, something transpired that caused him to become more self-aware, self-conscious, and that caused him to not desire to seek God. When he became self-aware,
Yeah.
and there's some evidence in some of the older text that when God first created Adam, Adam had a shine to him,
Yeah.
a glow to him,
Yeah.
because he was the representation of God, his glory, his being. And when sin came, the light of that glory that was reflecting God, it went out. Therefore, he saw himself as he was in his physical body.
Yeah.
Now, one of the reasons why this is believed is because the Bible tells us that Jesus is the very off-shining, the effulgence of the glory of God.
Yeah.
And so it is believed that the first Adam was also the off-shining
Right.
and the proof of the reality of God in the earth. He was the visible representation
Yes.
of the invisible God.
Now, I'm going to take it just a little further, Bishop, because I believe that We're on talk radio. We talk about challenging subjects and topics. So then now, let's talk about the finality of the afterlife. So where does and how does the soul come into play when it deals with the afterlife? Either if someone goes to hell or if someone goes to heaven, how does that play?
Well, again, the finality of it is that there is still extending into an existence what we would call finality, the finish of it. There's really no finishing of it.
Right.
Because when this world moves into its judgment and the new heaven and new earth is created, it's going to be a totally uniquely different system. And so finality, it really doesn't come into play here unless you're talking about the final functionality and progression of the kingdom, because it will never end.
Right.
And so what happens, the gospel is given out for the purpose of now causing mankind to realign his soul with his God. So in that final chapter of moving from this life to the next, we are now realigned. We are now connected. We are now continuously in fellowship with him. And that fellowship, because we were created as living souls, living, thinking minds that breathe, because the term nephesh is breathing creature.
Right.
What do we breathe? We breathe in spirit.
Right.
Our soul does, and our physical body breathes in oxygen. Therefore, the eternality of man gives his soul the continuous ability and privilege to always receive from his God, ever learning, but never becoming bored, because what we learn will enlighten us and inform us more about our God, our Father, eternality, heaven, and especially ourselves.
It's good. Oh, I'm sorry. I normally I thought that was the end of the segment. But okay, so then with that, now let's take it to the other place when we talk about hell. Could you elaborate on that too?
Well, the same difference, because the soul is eternal, and many people make the mistake of saying that God sends us to hell.
Right.
No, he's done everything to keep us out of it.
Exactly.
And what happens, heaven and the presence of God is so sublime and so filled with light, and it is the, I'll say, omniety
Right.
of light, omniety of purity. And therefore, anything that is not of pure light that comes from the effulgence or the offshining of God automatically will be repulsed.
Yeah.
And that soul that is not enlivened by the presence of God now will be swept away into a place that accommodates us. And so a darkened soul cannot live in the presence of God.
Right.
So automatically the presence of God will drive that dark spirited being into a place that was created to house things that are antagonistic against the harmony, the life, and the will of God. When we turn on the lights, and even though in this realm there is no such thing as absolute light, there are degrees of light. When we turn on the light, automatically light scatters.
Yes, sir.
Light is condensed because,
Darkness. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Darkness is the antithesis of the light. And so what happens, the light doesn't have to speak to it. The light just shines forth its nature, and automatically darkness is crippled.
Yeah.
Darkness is
Crushed.
squeezed.
Yeah.
Darkness moves. Now, and I don't want to get into the theory of black holes, because they say black holes suck in light, but they've also found out that there are phenomena that light comes forth out of black holes, and black holes may possibly yield light that causes galaxies and solar systems to come into
Wow.
effect.
Wow. So, with all that being said, with everything that we've heard about the soul being eternal, for us as believers, and even some of us who may listen that are unbelievers, there, I still see God's grace through it all, because before we reach that place of, the afterlife, as we would call it, it's we have the opportunity to be able to choose to connect with Him at any point of our lives.
Well, that's the reason why God doesn't just let everybody die.
Exactly.
Or let the enemy just kill
Exactly.
everybody.
Exactly.
And why anarchy hasn't come
Yeah.
to the point
Yeah.
where it just totally overruns civilization
Yeah.
or socialization.
Yeah.
And so what happens, every day a person has another day.
Yeah.
It is the grace of God giving them another chance to make a decision
Yes, sir.
as to where they're going to spend
Exactly.
the life of their eternal soul.
Exactly.
And that's why the church has to give the message, not so much as addressing people's faults, their failures. People, I believe they know that they have it bad off.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there are some who are self-righteous and who believe that they are the cream
Right.
that
The
floats
crowd.
on the top of
Yes,
the
sir.
mountain.
Come on.
But most people are not happy with their lives, not happy with the choices that they make.
Yeah.
And so God gives us, through His grace, another day, another chance, another opportunity to discover Him and to find peace and true life.
And Bishop, too, I was thinking about this as well, because when we talk about this, man being in sin, our minds switch to a debilitative thought process that was anti-God. And so now, from the time we're born all the way up until the time that we are consciously aware, we're rooted in behaviors and thought patterns that are anti-God, which are anti-life, therefore giving us those problems and issues and things of that nature. But again, I see it again, the grace and love of God, that with all of that time that we have from the beginning of our lives to the point we are now in the present, He can still interject Himself, if we allow Him to then rework and to then reshape our minds so we can be what He wants us to be, but also live out that life that is successfully peaceful and abundant.
The interesting thing also is that there are two components of man that is immaterial.
Yeah.
And there are two components of
Right.
man that literally are immortal or will not die.
Yeah.
Now, there's two types of death, of course. One death is the cessation of being in your physical body.
Right.
But the soul and the spirit never die. And so what that represents to us is that for those of us who are born again, that the eternal spirit is within us, and that no matter what we're in right now, there's coming a time when our soul will be liberated,
Right.
and the spirit that is in us through the new nature that's imparted into us will always bring us into a greater
Yes, sir.
understanding, a greater state of being. And so eternality affords to us greater.
Exactly.
Eternality affords to us glory. It affords to us a release from
Yes,
the
sir.
bondage of our physical
Yes,
man,
sir.
of our complications, of our problems. And so He's bringing us into a final stage
Yes, sir.
of a perpetual peace,
Yes.
growth,
Yes, sir.
blessedness,
Yes, sir.
light, power, and life.
Yes, sir. And learning. And I know you said that too, but and learning. And so we should continually look for that every single day.
Yeah, so the Spirit is bringing us to a point where it will never end. We will experience the joy, the power, and the peace of God throughout all eternity. This has been Talk Radio. This is all the time we have. We thank you. Don't forget to listen, like, subscribe, and share.
Have a wonderful day.
God bless you.